Welcome to the Coaching Family Soccer Coaching Podcast, a podcast for soccer coaches from grassroots to the pro game. Soccer coaches who love the game, love coaching, and want to get better. Join our community on Twitter at Coaching Family.
So, welcome to the Coaching Family Soccer Coaching Podcast, a podcast for coaches at all levels, all around the world. And I'm joined today by Glen Hicks. Glen, thanks very much for joining us, mate.
Brilliant, Saul. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Good chat.
Chatting about football as always.
I'll just give people a brief. You've got over 20 years experience coaching in all levels of the game. You worked at Cat 1 Academy many years in North London. They play in white, if you know what I mean. And so we're just great to have you and your experience on the show, have a little chat. So for the first show, I thought we'd chat about session design, in terms of what are the first things you think about, wherever you are, wherever you coach, what are the first things that goes into your mind when you're planning a session and you want to produce a quality session for players, whether it's grassroots or academy players. So what's your thoughts then? You're going to set up a session. What's your first thoughts on session design?
It's a good question. We live in a world where there's all sorts of information on Twitter and all of these wonderful platforms, and we've probably got access to resources and information and some absolute expert coaches sharing wonderful ideas. We can all log online now and watch a Pep Guardiola session, or Joe Blogs down the road doing a grassroots session. You can pick up something from everyone, but me personally, I always bring it back to the players and the individuals. So the first thing is, who are my players in the session today? How old are they? What's their ability levels? So having worked at grassroots football for years and taking junior teams from like under 9s, under 10s, right up to under 18s, and work the other side in terms of at the elite level with academy players, I think that's always the most important question, because when you go from grassroots to academy, there is a huge step up in ability. So we have to adjust our session planning, the content and quality of what we deliver. But I always bring it back to individuals first. I forget the game. Who have I got in my session? Boys, girls.
But think about then, practically then. So think, how does that affect practice? For example, if I'm locked, what my thing is that obviously have a picture in your mind what you want to work on and what the topic is, whether you've got a curriculum or you've got a grassroots thing. For me, my first thing I sit down is obviously I'm thinking about the players. I'm one of my main things is ball rolling time. So I like my sessions to try and roll seamlessly from one part into the other. There's no standing around, no going to the side, none of that. That sort of I want to get the players maximise the contact time with the ball. So a lot of my first thing is thinking, obviously I've got an idea what I want to work on, but the players is actually how I'm going to construct, actually build my session into that pitch. So, my things are right. So, for me, it's a bit like, how many numbers have I got? I've got 15, have I got 16? If I've got 16, I'm thinking maybe, I'm starting off individually and then I'm going into pairs or 4s or 8s or whatever. Do you know what I mean? I'm really, one of my initial things is that how can I construct my pitch, to really maximise outcomes and maximise ball rolling time. That makes sense? I mean, I really think about that. So you want to try and go from seamless to the other. So especially if you're a grassroots coach and you've got 1 hour a week, is that every second counts, doesn't it?
Yep. And that's why I think as well, it's a good point. And I think sometimes when people watch me coach as well, I spend quite a bit of time making sure I've got footballs in my hands. It's what you said about ball rolling time. I'm obsessed with not letting the game die. So if you're doing grassroots or an academy session, it doesn't matter what level. If the ball's gone out of play and they're chasing the ball for 30 seconds, well, if they do that 10 times in a session, you're already clocking up minutes of wasted ball rolling time. So I think it's a really good point. So when I do that personally, I'm constantly either chasing balls or getting other people to do it. And then I tell the young coaches as well, keep the ball rolling, keep it in play. Like sometimes don't even do throw-ins in the games. Like pop it straight back in play, get it in.
Yeah.
But I think the thing you said about space is important, Saul, as well. So the bigger the space, the more distance they've got to cover. So I try and squash the pitch as much as possible as well, as often as possible, all ages, to be honest, in a lot of the practices, to keep it high intensity and really keep bringing it back to your individual or small group work in terms of technical excellence and dealing with having to make quick decisions as well. So
yeah, I'm a big fan of tight spaces as well. But I noticed actually when I went to Chelsea from Tottenham, where there's a big culture of, as you know, tight spaces, and Chelsea was almost the opposite, whereas big spaces, much more athleticism. And I sort of, even though my inclinations would still go back to small space, I thought maybe sometimes I need to have more of a balance where you got to let the players open their legs up a little bit. Do you know what I mean? And stretch them athletically, and also, I mean, Diggers, who's the now head of coaching at Liverpool, who was at the FA, or one of the head of developments. He always talked about, and he's banned mini goals from Liverpool because he talked about everything tight spaces, that you didn't have players going in beyond anymore. Do you know what I mean? You didn't have those players, in academy football, those number 9s like Michael Owen almost getting used to like having balls over top and running behind, because everything is small spaces. But I mean, it just made me think about my as a practitioner, how do I set players? I think, as our background at Tottenham, working in that academy with Chris and stuff, that we did that technical excellence in those tight spaces. Whereas going and seeing someone else doing it bigger, I think, I was definitely probably open up a little bit more sometimes. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes have bigger spaces while given those contrasting sort of experiences.
Yeah, but I do agree with that. But it's about balance though as well, because the thing is as well, I think there's an obsession with short passing as well. And I think what you get there is all of a sudden kids get to 12, 13, they can't kick a ball properly over a longer distance. So even with that, I don't think you should. It's not about. I still believe, especially the foundation age, I still shrink the pitch as much as possible, because I think the bigger stuff and the growth and everything, I think you can teach someone to run over 30 yards in behind a lot easier than you can to receive the ball in a phone box with a player all over your shoulders, all over your back. So I would still lean towards that. But so with the passing thing as well, I sometimes hear coaches discouraging a long pass, and I think we've got to be careful of that as well, because for me, one of the best passers of the ball in world football, full stop, at the moment is Ederson. And his 70-yard pass is something of beauty, like David Beckham, and you don't want to discourage that in a kid. But it's about, if it's a pass, great, encourage it. If it's just a boot up the pitch, then you discourage that intent, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, isn't it? Because it's a real important technical quality, that ball striking ability, which comes with repetition. So, for argument's sake, then how do you work that into your session? You're a grassroots coach. You've got an hour session. You're on ball rolling time, maximum game type activities. How do you support players into developing longer passes, especially you've got tight spaces as well?
Yeah, again, another good point. I think when you're privileged to some of the clubs, you said you've observed people, and you're not as limited with space and facilities, so you can sometimes say, right, we want to go big pitch because you've got the space. But having worked at grassroots, I think there's much more constraints in terms of your own planning. So after I've worked on the individuals in terms of my session planning, so I would say, okay, what area have I got? What's the weather like? What area have we got? Are we sharing a pitch with the under 12s? Have we got a quarter of a pitch tonight? Because sometimes you get a quarter of an AstroTurf. You know what it's like. It costs a lot of money as well. The bigger space you get, and they're all things to consider with grassroots coaching. But sometimes that's the way. If you can get 2 sessions a week and you have got an opportunity to have half a pitch, sometimes it is good to go a bigger game, 7v7, 9v9, and open up the pitch. But if you are limited, it's about being creative. Like, you've got a quarter of an Astro. Do you want to shrink that to half that size for some of the practice and then open it up? But like I said, sometimes you're actually restricted by what facilities you've got, and sometimes you're sharing a grass pitch, Astro. Do you know what I mean? So that goes into your individual planning, really.
Yeah, I think as well it's about being creative with your time, isn't it? So for me, it's also like, as you know, I'm not a big fan of passing drills, but you've got to still get that quality contact time with the ball. So I often use those passing, between 2s or 3s, short, long, as almost like recovery exercises sometimes. So high intensity 1-on-1, for example, maybe break, a couple of minutes of, low intensity passing, work on that technique, then back into the high intensity stuff. So like active recovery stuff, do you know what I mean? So rather than, go over there, sit there, have a drink, 5 minutes off, or just go break off, in 2s, little just long passing, bang, ping a couple of balls, long passing, a couple of minutes active recovery, then bang into the next one. So I think it's about being creative, isn't it, with your session, thinking, all right, I want ball rolling time, I want lots of game time activities, but you still got to work on those technical elements. And I don't believe, even all these, constraints-based coaches who want a game-based everything like that. If you're not giving players the opportunity to just strike the ball a lot with quality and build that relationship and understand how it responds to your foot, players are going to struggle to develop that. And or you're even monitoring it, saying, all right, there, and you challenge them to do it away from training, and then you need some sort of way to gauge how they're going. But I think it's just being creative about your session design, isn't it, and where you're going to put it in there.
Definitely, and again like that. So the basic short, long. If the listeners can picture it, even if you just got like three players and you play the pass, follow the pass, do a couple of short passes. Again, it's just about the distance. If you do that over 10 yards, you're getting short, sharp passes. You're gonna have to move quicker to get on the angles. If you just say, right, open it up, guys. Let's go over 30 meters now and do the same practice. You're actually now having to run a little bit harder over bigger distances. You're having to adjust your technique. You haven't changed the practice, but the distance is drawing out different techniques. So you've now got to drive or loft or clip the ball, whatever technique you want to focus on. You might set a challenge at the end on a touch. So on the short, long, yep. Can you keep it up in the air? On the final one, you've got to set it, whatever. You can just set technical challenges within the same practice. I think as well that, there's lots of conversations, and it's almost becoming a war in football and in most development things really. So the whole nature versus nurture. For me, if you just change the V to a plus and you say it's really nature plus nurture, it's the same with constraints-based coaching. For me personally, anyway, I think it's about balance. I don't not do any of them. I tend to favour certain practices, but like drills, for example, I think they're important. I think James Ward-Prowse or David Beckham, when you see them hit record amount of free kicks in the top corner, I don't think that comes from doing a group possession session. I think it's stripped back to the real raw basics of me, the ball, and a target, and I'm going to kick the ball properly. So I just think it's about balance with practice as well.
Yeah, but also look, we know because we have the Twitter sphere, which is like the binary, yes or no. We know, we worked academy football. I've travelled around the world. You go anywhere, you're going to see game-based stuff and some some unopposed stuff, some technical stuff. It's like I say, it's a balance. And anyone who tries to tell you otherwise doesn't work or never experienced those environments. You know what I mean? So that's the reality, isn't it? It's everyone, you choose when and where to do it. And a bit of a balance here and there. Everyone wants majority of sessions will look like a game. They'll be game based, whatever. Been doing small-sided games than bigger format games. But yeah, players need to develop those technical things with the ball as well. That time with the ball. So maybe again, they come back to the sessions. What about like a rival activities? What about rival activities? You've got players coming in. What sort of stuff are you setting up for players to come into?
Yeah, again, sometimes it's depending on the weather as well. So we've had a nice little bit of winter sunshine the last few days. So instead of getting them in and doing rondos as they arrive, or just some dynamics or a bit of ball mastery, we've actually got them doing a bit of football tennis because the winter sunshine's all right. They come in, they play a little bit of two touch or a little bit of football tennis. But I think whatever activities you choose, get them on the ball as quick as possible because they come running through the game, even if it's like ball and wall stuff for the first 5-10 minutes. Set them a couple of little tasks, but get their feet on the ball as soon as possible and a ball each if possible. If you ain't got them resources, ball between two, because the kids come bursting through the gate to your session, not because they want to do laps around the running track, because they'd go to an athletics club if they wanted to, but they want to get their feet on the ball. So whatever activity you choose, try and set something up where it's competitive, whether that's you set them individual tasks and challenges like targets, get there early, make a little square. Little Johnny, you done 30 kick-ups last week in the first 10 minutes. Can you hit 35? And then he's in his own little competitive zone. Or if it's a passing practice with someone two-touch, okay, first 1 to 10, go and play two-touch. But make sure, me personally, just get on the ball as early as possible as a warm-up.
So you're saying like rondos, typical, bit of football tennis, bit of wall work?
Yeah, just obviously not straight into... you can even make it competitive as well. Warm-ups on a first team pitch look completely different. I know the sports science team controlling stuff, but they're fully grown men where the bodies are like finely tuned F1 cars. So you need to do that. But with kids, even at rival games, get them on the pitch. Say, okay, for the next 2 weeks, as soon as you get here, guys, we're going to go into games. Then after 10 minutes, we're going to do a bit of training back into games. So like the whole thing. And you'll notice that kids get there a little bit earlier, Saul, because what they want to do is games. And it was only just the other night, I'm mentoring a few young coaches where I'm working at the moment. And I asked the kids on the way off, 3 of them, hey, young man, how was your session? Good. What was the best bit about it? Because we've done a whole thing. I said, the games at the beginning and the games at the end. And I said, why is that? I said, didn't you like the training in the middle, all that technical stuff you was doing? They said, yeah, we loved it. But we just like playing. We love the game. So sometimes just the game's always one of the best activities. And even if it is on a bigger pitch, start 1v1. As they come in, 2v1. 2v2, and literally it builds up, and you might end up with a 6v6 or 7v7, like a playground in a tight space. But it's a great arrival activity as well.
Well, I was going to ask about that whole part hole. How often would you use a whole part hole?
Again, I'm not really rigid. I'm not really rigid in my thinking, and I don't really believe in obsessing about coaching a curriculum, because I think it could become like schools in terms of an obsession with coaching the curriculum and meeting targets and outcomes, and forgetting about coaching players and helping young people to develop. So it varies, mate. You know, sometimes I'd go heavy on it for a few weeks because they need a bit more play time and they need to express their skill levels and whatever else. And it just varies. I couldn't give an exact answer.
I suppose it's like, if you're, especially with your younger ones, it's easier, isn't it? Because in terms of, you know, their bodies, they don't necessarily have to do a structured warm up. They, you know, go in and get warmed up already, you know, until they get to. And then you've got to think about the other, you know, you've got warm up first, then do it. So that's going to affect your ability to go straight into a game. And then you're thinking, right, well, I've got to do a ball based warm up, please. You know, I still see coaches not using the ball in warm ups. It's ridiculous in my opinion. So like, yeah, but then obviously that affects it. But the younger ones, the best I saw when I was at Ajax last time, a couple of years ago, pre-COVID, they did a whole part hole. I watched the 8s and 9s do a session. They did game to begin with, and then they went about like 20 minutes, and then they went into doing they did some S&C stuff. They will do that, and then he came in back, and then did some individual ball mastery. Then it went into some 1v1, then into some 3v3s, and then another game. And I thought it was really interesting, because I think maybe I become a little bit sort of rigid in my thinking, saying, right, you know, obviously you've got to do some ball mastery every session, which you have to anyway, in my opinion. You've got to do some ball related stuff, even if it's 5-10 minutes, and it just sits more easily at the start, because, you know, that's almost when you're warming up players. Also with the young ones, we can, you know, do it in the middle, or even do it at the end. You know, we need to get some contact, some quality contact with that ball to, you know, guided and freedom to relate that. So I think sometimes I've been maybe stuck a little bit. I could do, you know, do it in different times. It just seems to sit at the beginning. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. One thing, again, just being conscious of the listeners, and again, it depends if you're working at an academy and you've got the players 2, 3, 4 times a week. Again, I think you're gonna see more variety across your training plan and your delivery. So might be more heavy on tactical stuff. And when I say tactical, I don't mean 4-3-3. I mean, if they're young kids, they're learning about 3v2 overloads, decision making on 3v2s, overloaded, underloaded, decision making in small group possession stuff. And then obviously on a Wednesday, you might say, right, we're going more really individual. We're going to murder the ball tonight, really physical, really individual. And then Thursday, more games related. So that's, for example, that's a loose framework of what it was like at the club I'm working at. But if you've got the players only on a Thursday night, Southend Juniors FC, grassroots team, under 11s, again, a big part that used to come into my planning when I'd done the grassroots tool was, a question was, what can they do when they're not here? So in the next 6 days is the most important time of their development, because they're only with us for an hour and a half this week, and we're going to see them again on Sunday probably for an hour and a half, and maybe maximum 60 minutes game time if we share the game time fairly how we should. So in my plan it'd be like, okay, if they can do that, how much can we get them and encourage that type of practice? So the ball mastery, for example, so I am a big fan of it, but sometimes I cut it down in my grassroots sessions to do just 10 minutes. Saying, but you know what, for this week, you've got to get another hour in somewhere. You've got to get at least 10 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day. That's your responsibility. Because some of the group stuff that they need to work on, the 2v1s, the 3v2s, the 4v4s, the small game format stuff, they can't get on their own sometimes. You know what I mean? They'll play in the playground, but a lot of the time it will be just them on their own training.
Yeah, listen. I'm grassroots session. I mean, even if it's 5 minutes, I mean, is it right to do 5 minutes, just get a little bit bored with the ball, you know, get your body moved with the ball, then you're into your, you know, 1v1s, your 2v2s. You know, I agree. It's like when and where, and then the onus is on the players to say, you know. But I think it's important as well to say, you could look. There's little, you know, Jimmy or Jennifer, say how they doing those movements, those lateral movements. Okay, remember next week, work a little bit harder away. You know, it's important to, you know, you're sort of measuring, learning, aren't you? Constantly looking at who's working, who's not, who needs a bit more help. And then I'm definitely speaking in grassroots, you know. But you know, it's 5 minutes. That 5 minutes can be really powerful, and you know,
definitely.
Really make a massive improvement then you going into your team sessions and stuff like that.
Yeah, and again, it's about constantly measuring. So when they come back the following week, and again, I'm just keeping it on grassroots just for a second, and again, if you see a slight regression because the group as a whole needs something a little bit more, then maybe you might go much more heavy and say, you know what, guys, we're going to do plenty of game time near the end or in the at the beginning or whatever, but we're going to go 30 minutes of ball work tonight, and this is what we're going to work on, and set them specific tasks. And then I think the takeaway message at the end of the session is so important. I think the message you give them with clarity, saying, look, guys, as a group, maybe you've all got to work on this, this, this. Really work it in the next 6 days as much as you can till we next see ya. And then individually, the little individual take-home messages, probably, you know, the best session plan for me, Saul, should always have, especially working with kids and youth development, excuse me, should be put their name on a piece of paper, the 11, 12 players, and make sure you got questions like, who are they, where are they, like what are they doing at the moment, and what do they need from me? And then that one, what do they need from me, from the coach, is really important at the end of your sessions. What message do they need? What are we trying to get them to go home and practice and almost be obsessed about to improve their game? Like left foot work. You can't improve someone's left foot if they don't want to do it. Like developing two-footed players is an attitude. And if you know they're leaving your session with an attitude, you've inspired them, they look, go away, do this practice on your left foot a couple of times a day. You don't have to ask, have they been doing it? Because when they arrive next Thursday, you're going to see competency, you're going to see improvement. And sometimes that then will dictate how much ball mastery you do, or how much weaker footwork, or do you know what I mean?
I mean, listen, absolutely, I agree, mate. It's the onus is on the players. Like, for example, you know, even when I was at Chelsea, we had, you know, the boys in, had them a lot. Every session we used to finish with like a weak foot penalty shootout for a sustainable series, for a bit of, you know, sustainable bit of time. And what you see was the peer, you know, the peer, not peer pressure, but that peer energy to it's on. I've got to go away and track, because next week, you know, Saturday morning we're going to be doing weak foot penalties. I don't want to be losing. I want to win this. And the ability of ball strike on the weak foot raised dramatically. It's interesting to see that. So just like simple things like that, and I suppose it's about how you motivate and encourage players to take that. I mean, it's easier when you're working in academy football, but even, you know, grassroots players, you're going to have players who want to get better, right?
Yeah, absolutely, mate. And I must say as well, but even in academy football, I think there's far too many one-footed players. I still think it's a bit of a crime when we watch professional footballers. They come out at the end of an academy system and they're playing on our televisions, and they absolutely refuse to use the other foot, whichever foot that is, left or right. And I think it's something that can be improved across the board. But that competitive edge thing you said there, so I think that can be created at grassroots as well. And that's where ego is important, because you don't want them to be arrogant with their ego and dismissive of others, and it can't become just about outcomes. So the best player is going to be the best player in your session more often than not. And if there's one lad there that is extremely two-footed because he's practiced really, really well at a young age, then they're always going to win that competition, or be there or thereabouts. So there still needs to be an element of improvement. So I don't know. Yes, penalties as well is a good competitive edge, but if it's a left foot kick-up competition, so say everyone's using their left foot and we're going to do scores, and as long as little Johnny he was on 3 last week, but he's on 5 now, and then next week he's on 10, and there's real tangible progress there as well. I think just stimulating that competitive environment is great, but the focus has to be, yes, on the winner, because you want to encourage winning and being competitive, but growth and development as well, and recognising improvement as well. So if a kid gets to the final of a penalty shootout, for example, Saul, but last week he was the first one out because he absolutely shanked his first weak foot shot, and he gets to the final, brilliant, superb progress. You're more competitive with that weaker foot.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, mate. And also, that's why I think, you know, come back to ball mastery, my passion, that's why that's so important as well. When you're doing your movements, make sure you're doing them on both sides, your weak foot turn, your weak foot lateral movement, because as we know, you know, if I develop that coordination on my weaker side, that balance, that agility, that's going to help me with my ball striking and with my weak foot, you know, control of the ball. So that's a really important part. I think a lot of people don't understand that, or well, maybe don't appreciate it. Rather, you know, the massive gains you're going to get with movement development. Do you know what I mean? With players and their weaker side, and that speed and agility, that balance and coordination. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely, mate. And I think the same. So if you just said now to a kid, right, we're going to work on our Cruyff turns, make sure you do 5 to the left, 5 to the right. Again, like you say, it's not, for me, as we know, because we've had, you know, some terrific people educate us and been exposed to certain things. It's not all about the technical stuff. It really is, especially with the young growing kids, where you know, is about the physical outcomes, and not just with attacking. I watch defenders that young players, and again, Premier League, bring it back to the Premier League, and I see technical deficiencies in you know, fully grown, mature international players, where they can't move as well to their right side, and they can't just make a basic block or tackle on the right or left foot, or you see a player go to clear a ball off the goal line, reaching across with the wrong foot, and he shanks it in his own goal or scores an own goal, and you think that's about attitude towards two-footedness, and that starts at a young age. And you see defenders get beat to their left side if that's their weaker side, if that's not their dominant side, so many times just because of that lack of movement. And if you're doing the Cruyffs and the constant twisting and turning, well, your body's programming itself, conditioning itself to actually get used to the movements as much as the technical work. It's a great point.
I think as well, for me, is when I'm thinking about session design as well, I mentioned it earlier, is that ball to player ratio is really important for me. So, for example, I've got 12 players, what I mean? I'm doing ball each, then maybe I'm going to do some stuff in pairs, or maybe in threes, or maybe moving to fours, and maybe being brave enough as a coach to, have 2 3v3s going at one time. Do you know what I mean? Or two got 1v1 challenges with 6 players here, 6 players there. They're both going at it, and being able, having the confidence to manage that. And I think a lot of coaches, maybe they in academy football, they'll set up a 1v1 practice and there's 12 players there, or there's even 10 players there, and they're queuing. Saying, why are you doing that? Why don't you set up 2 practices at once and have them running simultaneously? But I think there's almost like a craving for coaches to want to see every single thing, right? Which is fair enough. I want to see every single action, football action. But the problem with that the compromise is that it's less ball rolling on the ball, doing those actions. So for me, it's more like, rather them be guided, let them make their own mistakes, have the freedom, and have ball rolling time. And I don't see everything. I can step in when I want to, but the courage to manage those, even 3 or 4 sessions at once, in the middle, or 2, so if that makes sense, and then progress up to that last game. Which thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. And the thing is with that, and I know it's difficult, again, I'm going back to resources on grassroots. I know what it was like being a coach on my own, 10, 15 years ago, just my own balls, bibs, cones, raining. I'm trying to picture a session I was doing, and you've got 16 to 20 players. You're there on your own. Your assistant is sick for the night or something, or couldn't get there from work. It takes skill to do what we just pictured there, Saul, to break, instead of having a queue of players, because it's easier to manage. I'll have one group, I can keep me on, to actually be able to orchestrate that session, keep the plate spinning over there, keep that spinning there, make sure, because they're young, make sure behaviour's on point as well, because when little Joey kicks Johnny over there, and he might be having on the edge of a little tear up, and then over here it's not as competitive, so you might need to move player A to a different group and say, can you go over there and play Scotty over there? And you're not letting them know it's because you want best against best or weaker against weaker. One thing with that sort as well, when we set up 1v1s and 2v2s and 3v3s or any kind of competition, I think we're scared to put kids to play. So this whole play to your strengths. That's okay. That's okay if it's all performance based. If you're Premier League, you want to play to your strengths. If we've got Drogba, let's play how Drogba plays well. If we've got if we're all 5'8" like Xavi, Iniesta and Messi, and let's play that way that brings the best out in them. But I think you've got to practice. You've got to put players in an environment where they're practicing to their weaknesses. And what I mean by that is, I was standing on the side of a pitch the other day with the coaches and said, look at this team, look how small they are. There's an average height there of 5'8", 5'9". It's like a little Barcelona team. And then we looked at the other team and said, look at the big boys, a lot of big boys in that team. We haven't done that intentionally. But sometimes in training you should do that. If your little players are not good at coping with someone clambering over their shoulders, and I would say coming out, this is more coming out of the foundation phase. So 12 to 16, the youth development phase, we know that's like Land of the Giants. And, you can get a boy that's maybe 2 foot, there's a 2 foot physical height difference. And you've almost got to create in your training where you put them up against the big boy more. Because they're not going to learn to cope if you're not practicing that stuff. They may have to go through a period of suffering, but if you just put him over there with the smaller ones because they're both small, well, that's what they're going to be familiar with. If he goes up against a big boy and he learns to be a bit more nimble, a bit more evasive, not get tagged as much and not have as much contact, but uses intelligence, technique and great movement, then that will come from actually creating that situation in your training session, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just like, challenging the players as much as possible. But the question is that how much then do you do that in grassroots? I mean, academy football goes without saying, right? If you're not, you're doing a disservice to the player. If you're not challenging them every session, what's the point? I suppose you've got them, you've got your players in grassroots. How much? I suppose it's tricky, isn't it? How much you stretch them or not?
Yeah, and that's always. I think that in a nutshell, so is the coaching conundrum, isn't it? When do you push? When do you can you see the players' limits? Because if you push too much, it can become just as demotivating. And I've probably got a bit of a challenge with that myself. I'm quite a positive coach by nature, I think. And what I mean by positive, I don't always mean happy and smiley, because I'm not. I can be a right miserable, grumpy so and so, because sometimes your standards are a bit insatiable and a bit unrealistic, to be honest. And if you don't manage them expectations, even within a session, from elite players to grassroots, it doesn't matter. If you put too much expectation on a young child, or not enough, they can both be demoralising. If you get a demotivated maverick in your session because you're totally underwhelming them with your session design and the level of competition, you're not going to get the best out of them. And if you put too much and you break a kid and they become a bit demoralised, I'm sure we've all had it. Those that are parents with our own children, if they're struggling at maths or something, if someone's struggling with something, they don't want to go to class, and they'll find an excuse to not want to go to school. Or again, if they're demotivated because it's too easy, and it's the same across the board with their learning. And I think it's just about that absolute skill, and it is a bit of an art, to be honest. And some of the best coaches I've watched, they've got that. They know when to just quickly push someone's button and, hey, you can do more than that, and be a bit more demanding. And then if someone's overcritical of themselves and they've made a mistake, they know when to put an arm around their shoulder and say, don't worry, that's a great effort. That's a tremendous effort. I can see progress there, because the kid's beating himself up, and it's a really tricky skill. But I think that, in a nutshell, is the art of coaching, isn't it? So.
Absolutely. And so, coming to the end of this show here. Just what's your thinking, like a final takeaway, of session design? What do you think? For me, also, I'm thinking about like a couple of things. Is that competitive cauldron for me? I love that, like grassroots level, academy football. Can you set your practice up? It's competition in there. It's all the way through, and having that run through, and also that for me at the end is that free play as well. So I mean, letting players, lots of quality coaching throughout, but having that big portion of your session at the end just to let them play and be creative. Obviously, you might step in and talk a little bit of shit save here and there, but just letting that have that free play and that ball rolling time. What's your thoughts on those last few takeaways, you think?
Yeah. I think the whole competitive thing is really important as well, and it's not always a win and lose element of competition. It's more so you can compete with each other, and you've got to set that up in the session and be a competitive group. And when you get out on a Sunday, you want the players to be or a Saturday, and you want them to be competitive against the opposition. But I think you've got to keep bringing that competition back to me versus me, and the player versus the player. So how competitive are you? How much do you want to improve your kick-ups, or whatever the challenge is that you've set them? You want to stimulate that individual competitiveness as well. But I think my biggest thing with session planning as well is how much joy can they get from the session? Not necessarily. It's not always fun, but I think a really big part of your session planning is, don't get too bogged down with the technical. How enjoyable can this session be? And sometimes just saying, boys, you're going to go and play, or girls, you're going to go and play a game of Wembley for 10 minutes is the most enjoyable part of the session. So I think, in terms of creating an atmosphere, I've got this thing in my head at the moment, so where, if so, it's like flowers, like a sunflower needs to be in the sunshine to grow. If you put it in a shed, it ain't going to grow, right? So you've got to make sure. Everyone talks about environment, but it's more atmosphere. So if there's a game or a competition going on, how can you stoke it up if the atmosphere drops, or if it improves? So really think about what not always the players. What am I giving to this session? Am I an igniter? Am I making this session engaging and exciting and enjoyable? And all of them things leave to the kids going home with, hopefully, smiling happy feet, because they've had a lot of time on the ball, and smiling happy faces. And I think it's an important thing as a takeaway message to what a really good coach educator we all know, Saul, said something that really stuck with me in a CPD we done once. He said, a mark of a good coach is, he said personally, when he's watching, he watches how the kids come into the session. How do they run through the door? If they run through with complete and utter enthusiasm and a smile on their face, and they're begging their parents to get out the car on the way in, says they want to be there, and how hard is it to get them off the training pitch? That, come on boys, you've got to go home now, finish at 6:58 because you've got to be off at 7 because the next lot are coming on a grassroots pitch, and they're still there at 7:02, giving you a headache. You almost have to drag them off the pitch. So don't forget about, in your session planning, making it enjoyable and fun as well, because I think that's what every session we should aim to be. Can't always be that. I'm not an idealistic fool, but I really think you should always be willing to go and be willing to go off task. If your session becomes monotonous and you're just trying to get your session out for the sake of it, don't be afraid to just pick it all up, pick all the cones up, chuck a ball down and say, let's play, boys, and make the game fun.
I think, yeah, just you mentioned the word, the atmosphere. I think it's a great point, a great word there, because the same environment. For me also is that you're right, because for me, tempo in my session is so important. I want that buzz, I want that intensity. I want people coming out of my session thinking, wow, what was that?
Yeah.
That was like an experience, like sweating, working hard, enjoying, obviously, you want to challenge the players. Fun comes first, obviously, but I think that's really important. So, your tempo, your sessions, in terms of understanding when to tweak it, when to move it on. If the boys are bored, that's why, if they're getting distracted, that's because they're not engaged. So it's obviously a lot to do with your design and your tempo. I was thinking about my time in the classroom as well, the same sort of principles, whether, you don't want the kids to have the opportunity to get bored. They shouldn't be getting bored. They're getting bored because what you're delivering, right? Isn't it? You haven't created that, you said, the atmosphere, that environment, that intensity, that tempo, that fun, to do that. And I think that's really important. But listen, Glenn, you're a busy man. Thanks very much. It's been a real pleasure, mate.
Brilliant. Thanks all. Absolute pleasure. And good luck to all the listeners out there with their coaching. It's not easy. So good luck. Take care.
Welcome to the Coaching Family Soccer Coaching Podcast, a podcast for soccer coaches from grassroots to the pro game. Soccer coaches who love the game, love coaching, and want to get better. Join our community on Twitter @CoachingFamily.